and then strike the average. But again, there are different guidelines depending on where you are. Now, a few pointers. Don't drink any caffeinated beverage, no coffee, or smoke during the 30 minutes before the test. Number 2, sit quietly for 10 minutes before the check begins. So sometimes when you enter the consulting or the hospital and then we ask you to wait, there's a reason why we're asking you to sit down and wait patiently. Not that we don't want to attend to you, but we want the blood pressure to be a true reflection. So we'll give you about 10 minutes. During the measurement, sit in a chair with your feet on the floor and your arms supported so your elbow is about heart level. The inflatable part of the cup should completely cover, as I said, at least 80% of your arm, and the cup should be placed on the bare skin, if possible, not over a shirt. Don't talk during the measurement. So in the marketplace, when they are doing all of that and people are talking and beckoning, trying to attract customers and all of that, it's a bit of a problem. And then your blood pressure must be measured at least twice with a brief break in between. All right. So there's also another question. Right arm, left arm. Which one should I use? Well, it's a bit difficult there because there's no standardization to that. But I saw some studies that looked at blood pressure, right arm, left arm. 7.8% of the time, the blood pressure was elevated in the right arm. 7.2% of the time, it was elevated only in the left arm. And then 6.4% of the time, it was elevated in both. So you can take it left arm, right arm, and then strike the average. Or if not possible, then you take it in the right arm. And you take it 2 times, and then you take the average. So usually when you sit in the consulting room, the way we position the chair, you'd realize that we will take the reading on your right arm, the way we position the chair in the consulting room. Right. Now, Kwame, why all the fuss about hypertension? Why do we make a lot of noise about it? Why do we talk about it at every opportunity that we get? I think May was the month of hypertension. The World Hypertension Day is 17th May. Well, let me share with you some of the complications. And for me, it is how deadly this disease can be. The complications of hypertension are broadly classified into 2. We have what we call the acute complications and then the chronic complications. The acute complications, I've nicknamed them the gone too soon phenomenon. So we see a lot of that in the posters and then funeral announcements and all of that. Is it gone too soon? Why gone too soon? Well, the acute complications happen suddenly. So an apparently healthy individual suddenly experiences certain symptoms. What are those symptoms? Chest pain, also called angina, is one of the things that can happen if you have poorly controlled hypertension. A heart attack, which occurs when the blood supply to the heart is blocked, a condition we call atherosclerosis. I'm sure my colleagues here will talk about that into much more detail when they take their turn. Irregular heartbeat. So when your blood pressure is too high, your heart can have a certain irregularity to the rhythm. And then hypertension can also cause a burst or a blockade in the arteries that supply blood to the brain, which then gives you a stroke. These are the acute complications of high blood pressure. And an individual can die suddenly from these things, probably with the exception of angina. Most people or some individuals can die from these things. So these are the acute things. But there are also what we call the chronic complications. The killing me softly things. That's how I nickname them. It takes you slowly, it takes your life away, it chips away at your health without you knowing. So everybody will say, oh, but we saw Dr. Safu here and he was fine, and we met Lexis here, he was hosting this show. Why is it that all of a sudden he has a myriad of health challenges? And then in Ghana, typically you think that somebody is doing you, as we see. Because a lot of things just pop up all of a sudden. So the first thing I want to talk about as a chronic complication is something we call atherosclerosis. Look, when the blood pressure spikes, it damages the blood vessel wall, and it leads to a thickening and a narrowing of the blood vessel in very simple terms. And this is what we call atherosclerosis. Again, Dr. Yakoba and then Lecha will talk a lot more about this when they take their turn. The second complication is blindness, something we call a retinopathy. Kwame, the retina is the image plate where we all form images before it goes to the brain so we can see. All right, hypertension can damage that image plate in your eye and lead to blindness. Number 3, it can cause dementia. Dementia is a disease that takes away your dignity. It is a progressive decline in your cognitive abilities, your ability to think, your ability to memorize things, your ability to do what we call visuospatial thinking, think abstractly, and all of that. All put together, we'll talk about your cognitive abilities. And dementia can be a result, a chronic complication of poorly controlled hypertension. Can be a certain type of dementia we call vascular dementia. Number 4, chronic kidney disease. And I think 2 weeks ago on the Super Morning Show, I had the opportunity to discuss with Dr. Tano the near epidemic proportions of chronic kidney disease, the rising levels of chronic kidney disease. And globally, in most kidney centers, you would find hypertension and diabetes being 1 and 2. I'm sure, again, Dr. Yakoba will talk about that when she tells us about diabetes. Number 6, you can have something we call heart failure. Number 7, and very, very important to the men, we have something we call erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction. And this is one of the key barriers to hypertension in this country, especially in men, is this erectile dysfunction. Most of the time we make attributions to medicines for treating hypertension. Partially true, but the disease itself, if it is poorly controlled, can also cause erectile dysfunction. And the women are stakeholders here, because if you are not performing, then they are also not happy. But the men, it hits our ego when we are not able to do that. Lastly, death from cardiovascular diseases increases as the blood pressure rises. So the mortality rate, hypertension can kill you, and it is killing a lot of people. So these are the chronic complications as I have listed them. Kwame, as I conclude my talk, let me talk about prevention of hypertension. Some lifestyle tips that hopefully can delay the onset of hypertension and also help in the treatment. The treatment of hypertension is not only medicines, so I don't want to focus on that. So let me talk about some lifestyle changes that can help to prevent and as well lower your high blood pressure. Number 1, let's look at the do's first. There are about 5 of them. Eat more vegetables and fruits. Number 2, sit less. So no sedentary lifestyle. Number 3, be more physically active. And I am happy to announce that Dr. Yakoba is an avid cyclist.
Oh, wow.
Yes, she knows how to ride a bicycle. So for a woman, that is a very attractive thing. So anytime she's cycling around Legon, she gets a lot of fans. So be more physically active, and it can include walking, running, cycling, even dancing. All right, there are activities that can build strength, and then you can also do even weightlifting for that. Lose weight if you are overweight or obese, and then keep your appointments with your healthcare professional as you arrange it. Now, don't eat too much salty food. Don't eat foods high in saturated or trans fats. I'll leave that to Lecha to explain to us what trans fats and saturated fats are. Don't smoke or use tobacco. Don't drink too much alcohol. And Philip will tell me that the alcohol brigade just went onto social media and they are slaughtering me there. As I always say, if you don't drink alcohol, there's no good reason to start. If you drink alcohol, then stick to the limits. And Kwame, I think on several occasions we've talked about the standard allowable.
Yeah.
But again, I'll say it here. If you don't drink, there's no good reason to start. Don't miss your medications if you are on medications. Manage your stress. Manage your stress. But if IMF is in this country, I don't know how you can manage the stress. Regularly check your blood pressure and then also manage other medical conditions.
Great.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening in. This is my 20-minute presentation on hypertension. Kwame.
You wouldn't believe the question that came in on our WhatsApp platform, but I'll save that for later. you saw that question. All right. 055-1111-997. That's our WhatsApp number. If you have any question, you can send them through to us. I'm tempted to read Kwame's message, but Kwame, we saw your message anyway. 055-1111-997. Before we move on, Doc, I'm just curious. How does the pressure go high? What causes the high blood pressure or hypertension? What are the things?
$1 million question. So, scientifically, for us to determine cause, we have to go through a certain process. And that process so far says that there is no known etiological factor. There's no known scientific cause. But when we have a tall list of associated factors, associations.
Okay.
Meaning, if you take a particular associated factor, meaning you get a cohort of individuals who have that particular factor and another cohort who don't, then hypertension seems to occur in that cohort that has that factor. Number one, obesity.
Okay.
All right, it's a big factor. Number two, family history. It's a big factor, and that's why I always talk about knowing your family history.
Yeah.
Oh, mommy, you know what killed your mother? Oh, I don't know. She got sick and she died. You know, that seems to be the narrative most of the time. Smoking, tobacco. It's also another risk factor. Type 2 diabetes. It's a risk factor. High blood cholesterol, and so on and so forth. So these are associations with hypertension.
Okay. You know, since you mentioned smoking, I guess I really have to ask Kwame Obin's question. He said we shouldn't smoke tobacco. How about ganja?
Kwame, I knew it. I'm not looking at the screen, but I just knew it. Because anytime I mention tobacco, then everybody's like, oh, yeah, he didn't mention the thing, that, weed. So marijuana.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so the jury is out on that. Marijuana has a lot of good or medicinal properties. There are a lot of extracts right now, CBD oils, so they're good ones. We're using it in treatment of asthma, for example. We're using it for insomnia.
But the doctors are not
People can
smoking
sleep.
them to treat them, right?
No, we are not smoking.
Yes.
we are not smoking the weed, to treat this. So sometimes even how to deliver the active ingredient, is that whole pharmaceutical development, thing. So we'll stick to what we know, and what we know is tobacco. Tobacco has been around for a long time. A lot of research has gone into it. So smoking tobacco, we know, is a huge risk factor for hypertension.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Dr. Yalsaf is the CEO of Medicas Hospital, and we've been having a conversation about hypertension. Now, we'll have a conversation about diabetes, but our second conversation will be about cholesterol and diet. Like Dr. Osafo mentioned, food is an integral part of preventing some of these cardiovascular diseases. So what should we eat? What should we not eat? And all of that. Our very honorable author and registered dietitian Wise Chukudi Lecha. He's a passionate dietitian who does not restrict his work to the confines of the hospital alone. He offers dietary advice to the general public through publications and in the papers, on radio and whatnot. He holds a Master of Science degree in dietetics and a Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition and food science. And today he will speak to us about cholesterol and really what kind of foods that would help us avoid cardiovascular diseases. Mr. Wise Chukudi Lecha, welcome, brother, again.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be here and share my thoughts on this issue of cardiovascular diseases. When you read the WHO key facts on cardiovascular diseases, one of the associated problems or lifestyle issues or lifestyle modifications have been proven to have a strong link, and from Dr. Safo's presentation, we all heard how these lifestyle factors can affect hypertension, right? Now, if unhealthy diets express themselves in so many ways, increasing the blood pressure, increasing the cholesterol levels, increasing blood sugar, which Dr. Yakuba will be talking about, and all that. So it's so important to really know about cholesterol and manage it, because cholesterol, when I move on, you really see how dangerous it can be. The white man calls it the silent killer, because when you have high cholesterol, you will not feel headache or a sign. Sometimes when your BP goes up, you may have a headache or you may have something to show. But then for cholesterol, silently, it's rising and it doesn't cause any problem. But then what is this cholesterol? It is defined as a fat-like, waxy substance. I mean, when you go into our books, and it's necessary in the body. It can be used as an energy molecule. It forms part of cells. Cholesterol forms hormones, and there's a tall list of good things that cholesterol can do. But then when the levels go high, then it causes serious issues that I'll be throwing a lot of light on later. We have what is called the good cholesterol and then the bad cholesterol. So this is how it plays out. The cholesterol itself, being something which looks like fat but it's not fat, has to be bound to proteins before it can be transported in the blood. So the protein cholesterol combination expresses itself or themselves in different colors and shapes, let me put it that way, and that is what gives rise to what the types of cholesterol are. There's one known as the HDL cholesterol. Full terms is high density lipoproteins. So lipo is for fat protein combination. So this fat-like substance combining with proteins to move freely in the blood. Now the HDL that we call the good cholesterol removes bad cholesterol. So there's the other type which I'll explain further. Bad cholesterol from the body, from blood and other parts where it's stored, and moves them to the liver for destruction. So it kind of reduces the levels of the one that can cause problems. That is why it's called the good cholesterol. And also the bad cholesterol, known as the LDL, or the low density lipoproteins, combination of fats or fat-like substance, the cholesterol and protein. That is the one that causes problems. It can lead to conditions that will ultimately lead to the blockage of the blood vessels. That can eventually lead to strokes and even heart attacks, depending on where the blockage is expressed, right? So that is for the bad cholesterol. There's the LDL cholesterol. There's also one type known as the VLDL, or very low density lipoproteins. Very different from the LDL because of the type of the cholesterol that binds with the protein. So that one has more of what we call the triglycerides or general fats binding with the proteins, and those ones also contribute to disease, right? So out of all these subdivisions or classifications of cholesterol, it is the HDL which is the good cholesterol. When I move on, I'll be talking about how to reduce the levels of the bad ones and how to increase the levels of the good ones. That's also very important. Within the cholesterol conversation, we should always be interested in increasing the HDL levels, because it acts as a protective agent. Now, how do you know your cholesterol level is high or is bad? You have to test. Globally, nearly 1 out of 3 people are likely to have high cholesterol. So
1 out of 3
are likely to have high cholesterol. So it's so common. The only reason why I always say this anyway I talk about cholesterol, that somebody may say that or may think that they don't have cholesterol, is because they've not tested, right? So it's better we go do the test now and know our status, because high cholesterol can be reduced to normal, and I have seen it in my clinics, reducing very bad cholesterol levels with the lifestyle modifications, changing the diet and exercising, right? So get tested. That is so important. There's no way that cholesterol will give you a sign that you probably have, maybe you're vomiting, you have temperature, then a doctor will suspect that you have an infection and stuff like that. No. So the testing is so important. Even children, where there's the family history to cholesterol, children can have high cholesterol. So there are some children that recommendations are that even at the age of 2 they should be tested, right? And from 9 years they should be tested, and tested every 5 years and stuff like that. And for adults, at least once a year you should have a cholesterol test done so that you know your levels. Now, how does cholesterol affect health? The bad cholesterol gets deposited in the inner lining of the blood vessels, and it attracts other compounds. And when there's hardening, and the hardening peels off a bit, there can be bleeding in the vessels and scarring and stuff like that. All those behaviors or events can lead to the total blockage of the blood vessels. Now, blood carries life, carries oxygen, food, nutrients, and everything. So where there's the blockage beyond that point, tissues will not receive their fair share of oxygen and everything that they need. At the end of the day, they get starved, they may die, right? So there can be this conditions can lead to tissue death, certain types of stroke and all that, right? So high cholesterol is a risk factor for cardiovascular diseases, for stroke, coronary heart diseases and stuff like that. So there are very, very different classification. If you ask, I'm sure if you ask Dr. Osafo to expatiate on this, we will not be able to live here today, right? So the bottom line is to try and have normal levels of cholesterol. Now, how does diet, the wrong diet, increase cholesterol? That's the question I want to ask and answer. Now, if we eat too much food, you end up, or anyone who eats too much food, you end up having to store the excess, because the body cells, in your intro, Lexis, you said something about body composition and all that. So all those cells, network of blood vessels and all that, the organs, they have certain energy requirements, right? So in total, the whole body has a requirement of energy. And depending on your body size, your weight, your age, your height and all that, there's a certain quantity of food that your body needs to maintain the body. Now, if you end up eating more than that, what you do is that you cause the body to store the excess food. And in storing the excess food, they can also be stored as fat. It can be stored, excess sugars and all that can be stored as fat. Excess fat will be stored as fat. And all that contributes to increasing the cholesterol levels. Mind you, the human body produces the cholesterol it needs. That's about a third of the total cholesterol in our system. The body makes it, and that's all the body needs. So where does the excess come from? The things that we consume. So if you take in Dr. Safo's book about saturated fats, trans fats, so foods that contain those bad fats, they will increase the cholesterol levels. Now, what are some of those foods? Animal fats. So meat, for example. The fat in meat can increase the cholesterol levels. It is not that meat can increase the cholesterol, but then the fat in it. Now, a lot of meat eaters, people who eat a lot of meat, they put on weight because of the fat in the meat, not the protein per se. Now, if you don't handle the oils, the normal oils that we consume well, you can also develop cholesterol because of that. So from my observations and analysis from people's history and all that, I noticed that anyone who eats who eats stew in our country can have high cholesterol. I'll explain why I say that.
You're talking about our regular stews.
So if you ate something today and there was stew with it, you should go and check your cholesterol levels tomorrow.
Calm down, calm
Right.
down. Calm.
So why do I say that? The way we cook stew. When I was growing up, my mother taught me how to cook well and how to make stew. Luckily, after studying diet, I held a seminar and she was part of it. And she learned healthy cooking methods. She's one of my biggest fans when it comes to nutrition and one of my biggest motivators, right? Now, we pour the oil in the pan and then we add onions to the oil. That onion supposed to burn to become black and give a certain flavor to the stew. Then normally it's taken out of the oil. The burnt ones are taken out, the fresh ones are introduced. We go through those kind of processes. So on average, depending on the quantity of stew that is being prepared and then the skills of the one cooking the stew, we can spend 45 minutes cooking one stew, 1 hour cooking one stew. At the end of that process, the heat that we put under the oil, it breaks the bonds within the oil. And the air blowing over the oil also causes, once there's heat, the environment for chemical reaction is enhanced. The speed of the reactions are enhanced. The air blowing over will also cause hydrogenation. So the process, all these cooking methods and all that, number one, increases the amount of saturated fats in our stews and also increases the amount of trans fats or oxygenated or hydrogenated fats or trans fats in the food, right? So that is why when you pass through my office, I'll advise you that for the stew, cook the vegetables first. Let oil come in towards the end so that you don't have to keep that oil for too long on fire. Let me bring in, time is running out, other dietary practices that can increase cholesterol. If you drink a lot of soft drinks, you push in a lot of sugar. Often soft drinks are associated with diabetes and obesity and all that. So through those means, your cholesterol can go up. So people who are diabetic easily have high cholesterol as well because of the movement of the blood and all that, due to sugar present in the blood. And also the obesity. You take in a lot of sweetened stuff, you become overweight and obese, which is also a reason why the cholesterol can go up. It's not to say that someone who is obese will have high cholesterol, because even if I run an analysis on the number of cholesterol patients I attend to in a year, less than half of them are obese. That is also to advise people who are slim that the fact that you are slim doesn't mean you cannot have high cholesterol, right? You can be slim like me, but your cholesterol can be high because of the kind of things and the overheated oils you take. And I cannot conclude this session without mentioning alcohol. The wrong use of alcohol can also increase cholesterol levels. And if you abuse fruits, let me also put this out, because this is one of the things that helps our patients a lot. If we know that fruits are good, so we end up abusing them. Any food that is good and you overeat can also cause problems. So when I started sharing the tips, I said that when you eat too much food, fruits are also part of that group. So if you end up eating a lot of fruits, what you are doing is you are taking in a lot of fruit sugar. It's called fructose. And high intake of fructose leads to high bad cholesterol as well, right? So what are some of the things that we can do to reduce the cholesterol in terms of diet and lifestyle changes? Get the diet right. Watch your portions. If you used to get satisfied on 3 balls of K&K, 2 balls of K&K, begin to reduce that. If you are overweight and obese, begin to decline the BMI ladder. I use this illustration. The body mass index is classified from normal range to overweight to obesity. So if you are in obesity range, the aim should be to come to normal range. To come to the overweight range. If you are in the overweight range, the aim should be to come to the normal range, right? So when we sit as dietitians and even work on people's weights, we don't act as magicians that can bring weight down from obesity to normal within a month. No. I have patients who have dropped from obesity with a BMI of 35 and all that, now BMI of 26, but it takes time, maybe 2 years, 1.5 years, and they're able to achieve those goals. So losing weight is one of the ways to deal with cholesterol problems. So if you have high cholesterol and your weight goes down by 1 or 2 kilos in a month, you are sure reducing the total fatness of your body, or fat levels in your body. And cholesterol is also stored as part of all these fats in the body, right? So losing weight is one, and eating a lot of fiber-rich foods. Let me start with a kontomire, with ayoyo, with garden egg stew, and all those kind of things. That will give you fiber or roughage. Yes, that's the common term. And roughage will, the fiber will reduce the amount of the bad fats that your body absorbs and the amount of sugar that your body absorbs and all that. It's a way to deal with cholesterol. So you have to ensure that every meal you have, there is some vegetables in there. And you must reduce intake of fried foods if you want your cholesterol to be normal or reduce. How much frying are you involved with? We take cocoa and kose in the morning, fried rice, indomie fried in oil with a lot of things and all that. You must, I'm not saying that people shouldn't eat fried foods, but then you must take steps to reduce the volumes or the levels of frying that we get involved in. And it's very, very possible. You see, sometimes what drives people to be able to make the right food choices is the fear of death. So when they go to the doctor's office and they are told that the level of your cholesterol, if you don't take care, you can develop a stroke. You have so and so chance of developing stroke. And people are scared and they come to us for diet. They follow it, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to get to that extent. Eating well is one of the best ways to prevent diseases. So let's take some of these steps. Let's rationally use alcohol. For me, I don't normally, at a more personal level, I don't normally negotiate the intake of alcohol, even with my patients. It's a no. So, I mean, you can call me any name. You can do whatever you want to do. But your advice is don't drink alcohol, right? The recommendations are there. Anybody would like to follow them. But if you read current guidelines on alcohol, you are told that any amount you take can cause disease. Not only cardiovascular diseases, the cancers, the other non-communicable diseases associated with alcohol consumption, right? So we must get to a point where we are not taking alcohol, right? And then let me say a little about exercise. Exercise is so important. One of the ways to increase the levels of the good cholesterol is to exercise regularly. So if you have the habit of walking 30 minutes and all that, or you follow, we should not try and follow the WHO recommendations on exercise. That is to have between 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity within a week, or have 75 minutes to 150 minutes of high intensity physical activity within a week, plus some strength training, lifting a little dumbbells, 5 kg, or the big water bottle when you sit whilst you're watching TV. Can even inject some strength into your muscles. And in managing diabetes, for example, if your muscles are so strong, they pick up glucose so well, and you are better off, right? The same applies to cholesterol and all that. And when you do all that exercise, you burn the fatness level in your body, and you can actually reduce cholesterol levels. For exercise, we should start with baby steps. If you're not used to exercise, you cannot become a pro by tomorrow morning. You have to start by walking, by dancing and swimming. Choose an activity that you can keep doing even when the world ends, right? So I think I've had the signal that the time is overspent too many times. So let me just end it here.
Good stuff. I mean, this is very good. At some point, he said, call him what he wants. I'll call him a dictator. He says it's non negotiable. Don't take alcohol. Mr. Wise Chukwudi lectures is our dietitian, and interestingly, he's written a lot of books about dieting. I've got 3 of them here: Eating to Prevent and Manage Lifestyle Diseases, Be Your Own Dietitian, and Live Long by Eating Well. These are all books that he's written to help you with your diet lifestyle. Maybe a bit later, we'll tell him to share with us where we can get these books. But I think this was very informative, and we're grateful that you shared this with us. Yeah, if you're just joining us, this is our health and wellness series, the 3rd edition. We're looking at cardiovascular diseases. We had a conversation with Dr. Yao Safo on hypertension, and we've just talked about diet as well. Your questions are welcome on 055 1111997. If you're driving and you're worried about probably getting home and you don't know how to continue listening in, we're live on Facebook, so you can actually just walk into the house and put on your phone and go onto Facebook, get onto the Joy FM page. You can actually watch our video and post your comments or your questions in our live video feed, or just send us a WhatsApp on 055 1111997. Very shortly as well, we'll activate the phone lines so you can call and ask any questions about our topic. Our next resource person is a consultant endocrinologist and diabetologist at the Kolbu Teaching Hospital, a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana Medical School, and the head of the National Diabetes Management and Research Center here in Accra. She's an author who actually wrote a book that was launched not long ago, Let's Talk Diabetes. It's a reference guide for patients and their caregivers. Dr. Yakuba Atiase, and she's going to talk to us about diabetes. Doc.
Thank you very much, Lexis. Dr. Safo and Wise, very well, articulated points there. I am going to talk to you about diabetes and the link between diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We know that cardiovascular disease basically refers to diseases. Cardio is heart and vascular is vessel. So it's the heart and the blood vessels in the body. Diseases of these 2 structures. Now, before I start, let's talk about what diabetes is. Diabetes is a disease that is associated or that is characterized by high blood sugar. And the high blood sugar is because there's a problem with a chemical in your body called insulin that should move the sugar in your blood from the vessels into tissues. Mr. Lecha mentioned that the glucose and the fat and other things must be absorbed into muscles. So your muscles must use it. All the organs in your body actually need glucose because it's a body's fuel. So glucose is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But when you have too much glucose, then it is toxic because glucose in the wrong place is a poison. And that's what happens in diabetes. Because there's a problem moving glucose from the blood into tissues, it stays in blood and it poisons the body. Another important thing to know about diabetes is that it is associated with complications. And these complications are mainly complications of vessels that we've just mentioned. When the small vessels in the body are affected, we say microvascular. Micro means small, vascular means vessels. And when the large vessels are affected, we say macrovascular. So the small vessels are usually the vessels in the eye, the vessels in the kidney, and the vessels on nerves. But importantly, the macrovascular complications of diabetes are the vessels that supply the brain, the vessels that supply the heart, and the big vessels that supply your feet. So if there's any problem, and these are complications of diabetes, incidentally, these are 3 of the 6 complications that WHO classifies as cardiovascular. We won't talk about the other 3. So if you look at it carefully, it appears to me that diabetes is actually a cardiovascular illness. Because even though it starts from a problem with sugar, the dangerous effects are usually on vessels, large vessels and small vessels. Why is it important? So what causes the cardiovascular disease we are talking about? Dr. Safo mentioned hypertension. Lecha followed up with cholesterol. I would like to break it down and make it a little simpler. Because blood flows in vessels, in our arteries, is moving. If the pressure is too high, it will destroy the vessel. Imagine a stream by your village, in your village. When it hasn't rained, the water is flowing gently, nicely, doesn't carry anything along. If it rains heavily and it starts over flooding and moving at a high speed, guess what? Sometimes it can dislodge rocks. And that's exactly what happens in hypertension. Now, when there's dislodgement or there's damage in that vessel, something starts happening. We all have had cuts before. Once you get a cut, what happens? A clot, or the body attempts to seal that by forming a clot. Now, when you start forming the clot, if you have high blood cholesterol, then the cholesterol also joins in the clot formation. And that can become progressive. And eventually, the clot gets so big and may seal off that blood vessel. And that's what Dr. Misalecha was saying. If there's a blockage of that vessel, then blood will not flow. And blood is life. If blood doesn't flow to a part of your brain, the part of a brain or the part of a body that the part of a brain supports dies. So you see somebody, they can't lift their arm. It means a certain part of a brain that is responsible for moving their arm has been affected. A part of a brain controlling speech, it has been affected because that is where the blood supply. So two things can happen. Either the blood, when in hypertension, the pressure might be so much it can burst open the vessel, or it can damage the inside of the vessel. And when the body attempts to correct it, it seals it off, and that can also lead to problems in future. And that becomes a very slow process. You do not get a heart attack or a stroke the day the damage starts. That damage takes a long time, and that's what Mr. Lecha tried to say is a silent killer. It can take years, but the damage has started. One day, it will get blocked. It is not only hypertension and cholesterol that can damage the inside of the vessel. Blood glucose can also damage the inside of that vessel. Smoking can damage the inside of that vessel. And that is why when it comes to cardiovascular, we say make sure that your blood pressure is corrected, your sugar is corrected, your cholesterol is corrected. Do not smoke, because smoking will damage and start that process. Years down the line, you will pay the price of smoking continuously, because the damage will start and your body will try to seal it. Unfortunately, in sealing it, it will become a problem for you in future. So it's important that we understand. We've mentioned, Lexis, I meant to talk about the epidemiology of cardiovascular disease, but you gave the statistics. It's a leading cause of death globally. It's killing more. Just last week, I sat in a mortality meeting, and it's unbelievable that most of our patients are dying from cardiovascular diseases. Stroke here, heart attack here. In the past, it wasn't like that. In fact, in the past, we thought diabetes and hypertension and all these things were rare. If you read articles from 1957, they said diabetes was rare in Africans. Unfortunately, now we know that it is not rare, and Dr. Safo mentioned, in the next few years, Africans are going to carry the burden, or not Africans, the developing countries are going to carry the burden of cardiovascular disease. We are going to have more patients than even our counterparts in the West. Diabetes is also important in cardiovascular because I've mentioned that as the complications. But importantly, diabetes has also been linked and is called a risk equivalent. Now, if you've had a stroke before, Lexis, the chances that you are going to get another stroke is very high. If all things being equal, if you don't correct yourself, you don't do the right things, the chances that you are going to get another stroke is much higher than somebody who hasn't had a stroke before. Now, your chance, if you've had a stroke before, is about the same as a diabetic or a patient with diabetes who hasn't had a stroke before. So a patient with diabetes is the same as somebody who doesn't have diabetes but has had a stroke before. It's called a risk equivalent. And so we don't play with our patients with diabetes at all when it comes to cardiovascular disease. In fact, if you have type 2 diabetes in particular, it is likely I mean, sad to say, everybody will leave at some point. We are not going to be here forever. It is likely that it is cardiovascular disease that will take you out if you have diabetes. 65 to 70% of patients with type 2 diabetes will die from a cardiovascular disease. So diabetes is very, very, very important. And why is that? I've already mentioned that type 2 diabetes, sort of the glucose in your sugar, is part of, contributes to the damage in your vessel. So it's a very important cause of why we do that. But even way before you become diabetic, or way before they tell you have diabetes, something happens in your body. Because, you remember I said my opening statement was that because there's a chemical in your body you don't have enough of, so your sugar goes high. Now, when your body sees that my sugar is going up, my sugar is going up, my sugar is going up, the body now tries to produce more insulin. And that is a good thing, because it is the insulin that will eventually bring the sugar down. But that high level of insulin is also toxic. It's also not good for the endothelium. So hyperinsulinemia, or high levels of endogenous insulin, can actually contribute to cardiovascular disease. So it is not good. Some people say, oh, I'll eat my sugar, my body will bring it down. You don't force your body to work too much, because that can be toxic. It is important to remember and to know that diabetes usually, type 2 diabetes usually doesn't work alone. It's a very good pal. It likes friendships. And so once diabetes finds a good medium, guess what? It calls hypertension. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Safo has friends. Lexis, you have friends. I'm sure Friday night, if I call a friend of yours, he knows exactly where you are. That's exactly the thing about diabetes and hypertension. They like being together.
Right.
So if your blood sugar is high, know that if hypertension hasn't arrived, then probably in traffic, it is coming. They go together. Cholesterol, they love each other's company. The fact is, the medium that diabetes thrives in is the same medium that hypertension loves. If you have a friend, you like a certain kind of music, you are likely to be in the same place. You like going to church, we'll be in church. If you like going to one club, you are likely to be there. And that's what happens. One arrives and it calls the others. So once you've been diagnosed with one of these, be very careful. The others are on their way. And that is why I was happy to be part of this program, because it won't be enough to talk about hypertension and cholesterol without talking about the others. Now, it's not just that. Obesity or being overweight, that is also another good pal. They all love to be in the same body that is overweight. And so we must talk about these things. Obesity is not just a storage of fat. In the past, we used to think, oh, the person is storing fat, so what? Fat is actually an organ that produces chemicals that are also toxic to the vessels. What we call in science, we say cytokines and all those things. So all these inflammatory cytokines and inflammatory markers are dangerous to the cardiovascular system. So being overweight or being, having a lot of adipose fatty tissue is not just an innate thing. Granted, you can have people who do not have fat tissue but still have these things. But generally, if you have, excessive fat, then you are likely to have these toxic components in your body. Now, the thing I want to talk about cholesterol is that sometimes we look at, my cholesterol is 5, my total cholesterol is 4.2, so we are happy. It's normal. It is not always just looking at the numbers. The numbers are important, but sometimes it's what we calculate your cardiovascular risk. When we calculate your cardiovascular risk, we look at, are you hypertensive? So a cholesterol level in a patient without hypertension may not be as dangerous as the same level of cholesterol in somebody who has hypertension, who is obese, who has diabetes, because it is the work in synergy. If you have one and another, then the risk is compound interest. They don't work individually. You top up and it gets worse with time. So if you have one or two, then you should really know that your cardiovascular risk is becoming high and you must work on it. So it's important that we look at that. The other thing about diabetes is that diabetes itself is predisposes you to clots. You are likely to form clots. It's part of the illness. And so remember that we said that cardiovascular disease is having a clot or having a burst artery. So the clots in the body are important and must be looked at. Now the thing about cholesterol and diabetes is that, in addition to, I talked about cardiovascular risk. Another important thing to note about diabetes and cholesterol is that the cholesterol in patients with diabetes is slightly different from cholesterol in patients who don't have diabetes. The cholesterol in patients with diabetes, they are small, but they are dense, and they are very sticky. So if you don't have diabetes, your cholesterol, yes, it can stick. It will all stick. But if you have diabetes in particular, your cholesterol will stick even when the damage to your vessel is very tiny. And so patients with diabetes, you find out that your doctor is more aggressive. They'll say you have to be on this cholesterol medication. But importantly, of course, you go and see Mr. Lecha and his people, because the foundation of treatment of diabetes is not medication. It's lifestyle, especially type 2 diabetes. And in my talk, every time I talk about diabetes, I'm talking about type 2 diabetes. But the foundation of managing type 2 diabetes is lifestyle. Your food, exercise before your medications come in. So it's important. And so we don't just look at the numbers, but we know that your cholesterol is stickier, and so we are more aggressive. So some people will take their medication for 1 week or 1 month, cholesterol level comes down, and they say, oh, it's normal, I'm off it. You have diabetes. Remember that once your cholesterol has been high before, that lining in the vessel has been going on for years. Most patients with diabetes will have diabetes for a good 5 years before they are diagnosed anyway, unless you're in the habit of checking your sugar every year, and so then you are sure that I didn't have it last year. But by and large, most people don't check, and so by the time they are finally diagnosed with diabetes, they've had it for a couple of years. So the damage has been going on for a very long time. And so we give you the medicine to bring the cholesterol down, but also, if the clot has formed, to stabilize the clot. That clot I talked about, that starts. It's called the atherosclerosis Dr. Safo talked about. Because if that clot is not stabilized, it can easily dislodge and give you problems, give you stroke, give you heart attack in future. So patients with diabetes, you are unfortunately have a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Hypertension, also a high risk. But if you have hypertension and diabetes, then your risk is even higher. If you have hypertension, diabetes, and cholesterol, much, much higher. And you must ensure that everything we are talking about this evening, you try and adhere to it. It's important to remember that type 2 diabetes is potentially preventable. So if you are not yet diagnosed with diabetes, please try as much as possible to delay the onset of diabetes. Dr. Safo mentioned that I like cycling. I don't like cycling because I love it. I enjoy it, but I have such a bad family history. My parents had diabetes. My mother is still alive. She has hypertension. She has diabetes. My siblings have it. And so I know I'm very high risk, and I'm trying. I'm thinking, rather than get it in my 40s or 50s, God, let's take it to 70 something, So I'm trying, and then I realize that the more I do it, suddenly, it's not so bad. It started off as work. I'm trying to stop something from happening to me, but eventually you fall in love with exercising and doing all the things you do, and so then it becomes easier. So it's not easy starting. People see you exercising, they think, hey, you like it, or it's work. Nobody
I know,
likes it, but and somebody will say, oh, you're not big. Why are you exercising so much? Being big is the least of my worries when it comes to exercise.
Yeah.
It's about my heart.
Yeah.
It's about keeping myself healthy as much as possible. Eventually, like I said, everybody will leave a scene. But, you try and do your best. If they say, God says it's time, then you leave. So I think because I know we've overspent the time, I will talk less than 20 minutes. But
Okay.
I hope that I've given enough information.
You know, I got to be honest with you. I'm happy you are ending it, because you scared me. You scared the hell out of me the whole time. You know, it was so morbid. Just like, you know, and there were the walls, and I'm like, oh my goodness. You know, it was so scary. But really, that's the reality
My
of
intention
these.
was not to scare anybody, but my intention was to let everyone realize what we are up against.
Oh,
It's
we
killing us.
have.
That's the commonest
Doc.
cause of death globally.
You put it so aptly, and we have
So-
realized it seriously, because oh my goodness, nobody wants to have this disease, this cardiovascular disease. I'm really grateful that you have explained it so well. In fact, you broke it down very well, and now I'm now imagining the small veins and all of that, and how they could have problems, and that's what I'm saying. I was like frightened, you know. But if you are out there listening to us right now, I'm sure you've been very well educated, and you have questions as well. I'll activate the phone lines now on 0302216541, or you can send us a WhatsApp message on 05511119997. You know, Dr. Safo, let me come to you. You know, when you were explaining how the blood pressure works, right? You talked about how everybody has pressure, but it could be higher, and how it runs through your veins, da. Now, and I'm thinking, the underlying, one of the ways to prevent all these cardiovascular diseases is exercise, right?
Right.
From my lay perspective or picture that I'm playing in my mind, exercise makes this blood gush probably faster, or maybe,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it probably will increase the pressure of. I don't know whether you get where I'm heading.
You're on track.
Good. So let's
Why is
even
it
take.
beneficial?
Yes, let's take the heartbeat for example.
Right.
I exercise a lot, so sometimes I'm panting like half the time, right? And so I know that the heart rate has gone very high. But you're saying that this is exactly what we need.
Right. So, Kwame, whenever we all get excited doing anything, our heart rate, our first response, a physiological response, is to get your heart rate to go up. But in individuals who exercise consistently over a prolonged period of time, their heart rate actually slows down. I'm sure all the doctors with the national football teams, you should ask them. They take the pulse of the players all the time. They actually have a lower heart rate.
So is it because probably they've increased their threshold?
Right. So it's one of the things that happens physiologically, that when you exercise over a consistently long period of time, the number of times your heart beats per minute tends to decrease, because your heart's, we'll call it inotropic capacity, the ability to pump. The heart is a pump, in very simple terms. So the muscles become stronger. So when you pump, with every pump, it pumps out a lot of blood. So it doesn't need to beat so many times
Okay.
to get out that same amount of blood, what we call the cardiac output.
Okay.
So rather, your heart rate slows down, because every beat is now very, very efficient. And this happens over time. But yes, you are absolutely right. When you finish a 100-meter dash and you are breathless, oh yes, your heart is going to be pumping really, really hard, because you've subjected the body to a lot of stress, and your muscles are needing oxygen and all of that. So I think Wise mentioned it. There's a WHO recommendation on exercise. And here we talk about aerobic exercises. So you go for moderate intensity exercises, then you're looking at about, I think, 150 minutes or so a week. So you spread this out over that period. And if you go up to high intensity aerobic exercises, then you're looking at about 75 minutes per week. Again, you spread that over the course of the. If you do this consistently, then the number of times your heart beats per minute will slow down, and eventually your blood pressure will drop. There's this mathematical equation that physiologists will tell you about that directly links the heart rate, to your blood pressure, and we know about that.
Okay.
So it's a process. It's not just a one-off
Okay.
thing.
All right.
But one of the cautions I would also throw out there is that you should not start exercising except your doctor gives you the go-ahead. Because some disasters have happened in gyms. Somebody goes in there, your blood pressure is crashing through the roof, 180, 110, and then they say, oh yeah, I'm going to exercise. They get onto that treadmill and then they keel over. So you should only start an exercise regime after you've had a conversation with your physician and again with a physiotherapist.
Okay.
Right.
Great. Wise, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so just to add a little bit to what Doc has explained, exercise makes your muscles stronger, and that is why the biceps and all that, when you lift, they become harder, they bulk up, and that strength is also benefited by the heart muscles. So that makes your heart stronger, and the stronger heart or heart muscles will pump blood with much more ease. So there's no stress per se. So that is why exercise is good.
Okay,
for
that's
managing
great.
blood pressure. Right?
Let's get on the phone lines now.
The bit about exercise being causing emergencies, deaths, and all that. We should also note that more people die not exercising than
exercising.
who die exercising.
Okay, that's a good one. I like that. Hello.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. What's your name?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Chidiak.
All right, Chidiak. Let's hear you.
Okay. It go like this. The blood vessels is what conveys the blood. And then the settlements inside the blood vessel is the cause of this problem. Is the medical field saying that up to now, you are not able to get any medicine that when you take it, all the impurities that settles in the blood vessel can be cleared? That's my question.
All right, Chidiak. Thank you so much. That's a very important question.
Right. So, Nakaba, you want to take that? I think it's a challenge. I think that's the goal. That ultimately we're looking for solutions, pharmaceutical solutions to some of these health challenges. So I think that drug, when the day it arrives, whichever company that figures it out is going to make a killing, just as they did with Viagra. I think that's the goal. That's what we are looking for, how to be able to tackle some of these problems. Some of them are indirect things, as Dr. Yakoba explained. For example, the problem is not really glucose. The problem is insulin with diabetes. So are we able to get around that? These days, they are thinking about ways of even doing 3D printing of pancreas, organ development in laboratories and then subsequently transplanting these organs. But there's a bit of resistance with all of these laboratory development of organs as replacement and tissue cultures and all of that, because before you know it, we are putting all of these tissues and organs together and then voila, we're making designer human beings and so on and so forth. But yes, we're gradually moving in that direction, and the simple answer to his question is that is the desire, that's the quest in there. In all aspects of healthcare. I mean, I come from Mampong, where there's a Center for Plant Medicine Research. There's a lot of research going on in all of these areas regarding hypertension. I hope that they get an answer in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, they should use the same speed they were able to use to develop Viagra to develop that particular one. Hello.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, sir. What's your name?
My name is Francis. I'm calling from Taiwan.
Okay, Francis.
My question is to Dr. Osafo. I've been on amlodipine 10 and Covercell 5 for the last 17, 18 years. I want to find out, do these medications that is meant to control hypertension have long-term effect on the patient? Do they have any long-term effect? Because after being in it for a very long time, does it have any side effect that we also need to be mindful of? Thank you.
Right. So the simple answer is yes. Every single medication that we give to patients potentially can have adverse effects. So medication adverse effects, well known. And if you take the patient information leaflet in every medicine that is given out there, there is information regarding the the drug. And if you go through any scientific development of medicines, it is a requirement. By the time you get to doing phase 3 trials, you've done all of those safety things. So there's always a list of side effects, and that is why the regular reviews with your physician is important. At every review, we would ask about the medicines and whether or not you are developing any of the known side effects. Dr. Yakoba is big when it comes to patient education on disease or diabetes. She'll tell you that education. That's the first step, second step, third step. Then probably from the fourth step, then we'll talk about other things. We always need to discuss the drug side effect profile. And I need to mention that the side effect list there is not what is going to happen if you take the drug. It is just that these are things that can happen in some individuals. So you put out 2 medications out there. I can tell you that today I took a patient off a similar drug, amlodipine, because they develop headaches, constant headaches. We're still investigating the headaches, but we know that it's one of the side effects that you get from a particular drug. It doesn't mean the drug is bad. It just means that for particular individuals, they may develop that. At the end of the day, the benefits of being on medications and controlling your blood pressure far outstrips all the dangers that we have discussed, all the difficulties, all the complications that we have discussed with these diseases being uncontrolled. It far outweighs them. Anytime we believe that a side effect experienced by a patient puts them at greater risk than the complications of the disease, we will switch the medication. So it's really not a big deal at all. Just by being on it for 17 years in itself is not a risk factor. In itself, no. You can be on a drug for 2 weeks and you will get a side effect from it.
Okay.
So I don't want him to worry
Yeah.
about that, but then also educate himself with the patient information leaflet that goes with the medications if you buy them in a box.
Okay. Dr. Yakoba, a few questions here. Good evening. What is the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes?
Right. Remember, I started off by saying that you get high blood sugar because a chemical in your body doesn't work well. Now, there are many ways in which this chemical will not be enough. In patients with type 1 diabetes, they have no insulin or none of this chemical because the source of that chemical, which is a pancreas, has been destroyed by the body itself, and that is a disease. And so that is type 1. Usually common in children or adolescents, but it's also, you can get it in adults. In type 2 diabetes, we call it the prototype lifestyle disorder. Because type 2 diabetes, you don't have enough insulin, but importantly, sometimes you have insulin, but it doesn't work well. And it doesn't work well because of being overweight. It's too much fat working in the system. So, speaking in lay terms. So that's the difference. In type 1 diabetes, the body has destroyed the source of production of insulin. In type 2 diabetes, the body prevents insulin from working effectively. So often, and I said often, they have high levels of insulin.
Okay.
And remember I said that sometimes that high level of insulin itself can be a problem. So they have high levels of insulin, but it just doesn't work well.
Yeah.
It's not good enough. It's not, efficient. And so that's basically, and it's usually from lifestyle choices, and it's more common in adults. But these days, we have children getting type 2 diabetes.
Oh, wow.
Very common now.
That's interesting.
Because there are a lot of kids who are overweight, who are sedentary. Now we are on vacation, they'll sit behind the PC and play internet games the whole day if you allow them. Get your kids out there to play football, to jump. They'll say they are bored, but give them a ball, give them a bicycle, let them work out, and instead of paying DSTV just to keep them indoors,
Okay.
get them out to work.
A few questions for you, Mr. Alecha. So, Kwesi in Cantonment says, does eating too much groundnuts give you bad cholesterol? And K. Asenso in Asokwa Kumasi also says, as can egg yolk increase one's cholesterol level?
Okay, thank you. So I start with the egg yolk. No, egg yolk contains some cholesterol, but chewing and swallowing that does not increase the blood cholesterol levels. So we can eat boiled eggs with the yolk. There's no risk associated with that. And I love the question on the granules. The answer is in the question: too much granules.
Okay.
Yes, so that is where the problem may come from, because more than half of the fatty acid profile of granules is good fats. We call them MUFAs, mono unsaturated fatty acids.
Okay.
They are good. So in itself, a little granite will not cause your cholesterol levels to go up. But then if you eat a whole lot, there's so much oil in granules. So the body tends to receive too much fat or oil, store it, and then that is how too much granite can increase your cholesterol levels.
Okay. Patrick in Blekuma also has a question. Lexis, it sounds like all these diseases are more linked to the foods that we eat. Will fasting regularly not be the way to go? Chairman, because of that, you know one chop. He says even the fruits and vegetables in the market today are all forced to grow. Put tomatoes and pepper in the fridge for 2 days and it's watery. Our cooking oil, dear, only jar. You can even get the right food. Okay, you can't even get the right food to eat because it's all extremely expensive.
Unfortunately, fasting will not solve the problem because fasting can actually even create some of the problem. If you stay without food, the body has to make food for itself, and the processes involved can even contribute to increasing the cholesterol levels, for example. So we always advise, or it's good that people eat regularly. A little food in the morning, a little in the afternoon, a little in the evening, right? I think the way the economic situation can help in this cause is by not eating too much food, right? And that is what we need. If the food is small, you spend less, and then you get going, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Notidia sent in a message. Regards to you guys. So many patients in the quote stubborn academy insist their doctors did not specifically or conclusively say they were hypertensive or diabetic, and they use this to justify their games and non-compliance with medication and treatment. Can our guests speak to conclusive diagnosis and how this should be communicated to patients?
Right. So, Note, thanks very much. I think you know exactly what a lot of patients do when they want to avoid the situation, because it's a very uncomfortable conversation. Nobody ever wants to go to the hospital and be given a diagnosis. So it's a human reaction to receiving quote unquote bad news. So just last week, I had to talk to one of my patients who said, I am taking, and he mentioned a particular antihypertensive medication, but my doctor says I'm not hypertensive. It's just precautionary. And I told him in very clear terms that there is nothing like preemptive strike when it comes to hypertension. We make a diagnosis and then we roll out a treatment plan. And I need to say this, that treatment plan is not necessarily medicines. It's what we call the TLC. The younger people will say tender loving care. They get all giddy when they hear that. But that's therapeutic lifestyle change.
Okay.
That has to come into the conversation before medicines. Most of the time, I think we all just jump to the medicines then the first time. So when it comes to hypertension, I would make the point again. The diagnosis, for me, I think it's pretty straightforward because it's two numbers that we need to be aware of. It is what we do with those numbers that is what the problem is. And I don't want on this platform to put out to say that, oh, now we can all diagnose it. You leave it with your doctors. But it's, for us, it's simple. There are internationally recognized bodies, and these internationally recognized bodies give out guidelines every now and then. So the American Heart Association and then American College of Cardiology put out their most recent guidelines, I think, in 2017. And they even dropped the threshold to 130 for the upper reading and 80 for the lower reading. They're saying that if you record your blood pressure on more than one occasion and you cross this threshold, then we'll make the diagnosis of hypertension. The WHO also has a different recommendation. Their cutoff or that threshold is 140 for the upper reading and then 90 for the lower reading. So your doctor or your healthcare professional would be very clear in their minds. There's no ambiguity. There's nothing like maybe 141. So if you're using the WHO criteria and then or 91 and then you say, oh, it's a little above. There's nothing like a little above. There's just a number. If you hit that number and you cross that number on 2 or more occasions, according to the WHO, we'll make the diagnosis. And once your doctor makes the diagnosis, the rest of it is what we have been trained to do. Delivering bad news. It's an art. So your doctor will have to go through that process of delivering that information to you. And I think, Jacob, I think we all have our own way of delivering bad news. I think some like to receive it, direct, straight to the point. You just tell me as it is. Others to come, you have to do that whole, try to get the girl to understand the message,
Water the ground small.
You water the ground small, soft landing. You give them a soft landing. But whatever it is that you do, as Norty mentioned, you have to be clear with them what the diagnosis is and then what the care plan is going to be.
Okay.
I think we're all very different, so there's no standard in terms of delivering that information.
All right, Dada both sends a message. Good evening, Lexis. I am hypertensive and I'm on drugs. I experienced some pains around my thoracic or chest area. I've taken about 3 X-ray images of the affected area within the last 2 years. What might be the cause?
Well, that's a loaded question. When it comes to chest pain, there are different possibilities. So he's talking about X-rays because probably whoever saw him thought that this was musculoskeletal in its origin. But a chest pain in an individual with hypertension, we will need to explore it in great detail because we've talked about the cardiovascular system right now. The history has to be very, very, very detailed. We'll ask about history of diabetes, for example. We'll ask about history of high blood cholesterol. The family history is very important. And then your doctor will go into details about the characteristic of that chest pain. So it gives us a lot of information. So I'm not going to be able to give him a straightforward answer. All I'll tell him is that it is possible that he has a complication of hypertension. Angina will give you chest pain. It could even be an ulcer. It could be gastritis. So there are a lot of different possibilities. So he would need to have his doctors or sit down with the doctor and then it will be thoroughly examined.
These 2 questions, I'll put them together. Nisowa Intema says, good evening. My wife always gets abnormal figures when her BP is checked at the hospital. Meanwhile, when she checks at home, she gets normal results. What could be the cause of this? And then, hold on, and Akosia says, good evening, doc. Please, I always feel scared anytime I see the BP machine. I've tried so many times to fight this fear. What do I do, please?
Right, so both have described something we call the white coat syndrome.
Okay.
That's what we've nicknamed it. We used to wear the white coats. We still do. Sometimes the weather just doesn't allow for that. But it used to be all white in the hospital setting. And there was this phenomenon, and there still is. When people come into hospital, they see a nurse, they see a doctor, and then they get too excited. They get anxious, they get nervous, and then their blood pressure can go up.
Okay.
So sometimes the technique is that we do what we call home blood pressure monitoring, or something we call ambulatory BP measurement. Ambulatory means walking around. So what we'll do is that we stick the blood pressure apparatus on and you take it home. Kwame, the guys will like this because one of the instructions is that you don't have to bath for the next 24 hours. So we'll give you that instruction, don't bath. And then every 30 minutes, the thing is programmed to take your blood pressure during the day, and I think during the night, it will take it every hour. I want to allow you to sleep. So you get a bit of squeeze on your arm every 30 minutes. So as you're going about doing your work, Kwame, you can be in the studio working, we're taking your blood pressure and monitoring it. Over a 24-hour period, that gives your doctor a better assessment of your blood pressure and then we are able to better assess. So that's what we'll do with individuals who have this white coat syndrome. If you don't have that ambulatory BP device, the regular device, once it's calibrated, then we would ask you to keep your blood pressure readings twice a day, morning I usually recommend between 7 and 9 a.m. And then in the evenings between that same time as well. And then you do that for 7 days, ideally 4 days, we would accept, and then you bring the results in, and then your doctor will tell you what really is, because we don't expect you to get scared at home. So very, very important, you have a calibrated device, not one but just from Germany but from the United States, and then we can do that. So white coat syndrome is what they've just described.
Okay.
But if your machine is not calibrated, it could give you wrong readings.
Absolutely.
And that could be dangerous. And
Yes.
so I'm glad that Dr. Safo mentioned that.
So we can make a diagnosis when you don't need antihypertensive, or we could actually miss it because the thing is under reading.
Okay.
So it's very, very important. I know that these gadgets are now very ubiquitous. Everybody thinks they have it. I see them in pharmacy shops. I've seen them in markets. We also use them in hospitals. So please, it's important. It doesn't cost a lot of money at the GSA, Ghana Standards Authority, if you send it there.
Okay.
But I also must say that they must also be up and doing. Sometimes they'll tell you their device is broken down and it's out for calibration. But they are the body that does the calibration. You have to walk in and send it there for it to be calibrated.
Okay, let me go on the phone now. One of our friends is here. Hello?
Yeah, hi, Lexis. Good evening. I'm Alex calling from Lagos.
Alex, you're welcome. Let's hear you.
Yeah, great. So I think my question to Dr. Safo and the team is which one of the BP machines is recommendable? There's this one where you put on the wrist, and then there's the one that you put on the upper arm. I think I was reading some literature around that. There points one of them out as the preferable. Is that the case? Is there a particular one most preferable? And then in relation to, I think it's Lexis book, my question is, are there soft copies of the book? Because some of us can only access the soft copies of the book to be able to read the material.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
All right. Thank you, Alex. So, Doc.
All right, Jacob, I don't know whether you want to weigh in on the blood pressure methods. So not the device brands per se, but in terms of the method, the validated method. So brachial as against the wrist ones and all of that.
I think that generally the one that measures above the elbow is the more validated method to use.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that should be the way to go, because sometimes when you use the wrist, it gives wrong readings.
Okay.
And a lot of these ones, because they are so portable, there are so many. I mean, everybody's carrying it around. I generally won't tell my patient to use it. Buy the one that uses the brachial or above the elbow.
Above the elbow. Okay, that's fine. Mr. Lecha, so your book, do you have soft copies online?
They are on Google Play.
Google
So just key in the titles, you can easily
Can you do
download
that?
them.
A bit later, I'll let you tell us the titles and then how we can get the books. But I think we've got another friend on the line. Hello?
Hello,
Yes, sir. What's your name?
I'm George calling from Asasawa.
All right, George, let's hear you.
Yeah, I want to know if swollen legs are associated with cardiovascular disease. And then my second question is if doctor could explain what congestive heart failure means. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Right. So when it comes to cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, high blood cholesterol, hypertension, yes, swollen feet can be one of the earliest signs for cardiovascular disease. So if you have poorly controlled hypertension and one of the long-term effects is heart failure, then it is possible that you would be experiencing swollen feet, because cardiovascular diseases eventually affect the blood vessels, the integrity of the blood vessels. So you may have that. The pump action too of the heart can also be affected by all of these cardiovascular diseases. And then when that happens, then the pressure with which the heart beats and pushes blood around the body, is also affected. You can have liver problems because of these cardiovascular diseases, and that will also lead to you developing swollen feet as well. So we're not saying that automatically once you get swollen feet, it means you have a particular cardiovascular disease. But for me, it's a very important sign. It's a sign that you can easily pick up, that you talk to your doctor about, and you get your doctor to investigate.
It's interesting you mentioned this, because I was actually earlier looking at page 112 of Dr. Yakoba's book, Diabetes and the Feet. And you talk about all the issues around the feet, the brittle and infected nails and whatnot. So it looks like there's a very good chapter on diabetes and the feet in the book as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll take one last caller and then we can wrap it up here. Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, ma. What's your name?
My name is Evelyn. I'm calling from Dansomani.
Evelyn, let's hear you.
Please, I want to ask Mr. Dr. Safu whether there's something we call maybe when someone is pregnant, can the person have BP, like pregnancy-induced BP?
All right, thank you.
Right.
Like that.
So yes, there is. She actually attempted to give the full name. So we call it PIH for short, pregnancy-induced hypertension. It is a diagnostic entity, and when we classify hypertension, we try to classify it. Then we will talk about that as a separate entity. I think there's also diabetes. We would also talk about gestational diabetes or pregnancy-induced diabetes. So as Dr. Yakoba mentioned earlier on, I call them siblings. They are in one family, or she said friends. So they like each other. So yes, pregnancy-induced hypertension is one of those dangerous things that can complicate a pregnancy. And from then, if it's not properly controlled, you can develop what we call preeclampsia, and then the dreaded eclampsia, where the individual or the woman experiences fits or convulsions, and then some actually die, or you may lose the pregnancy.
Okay.
And once we get people after the pregnancy, the blood pressure tends to settle the 6 weeks after the pregnancy. But some of them, if you follow them up long enough, you'd realize that they go on to develop hypertension, and then they need to be on complete therapy afterwards.
I think earlier George asked also about something heart.
Yes, Yakoba, you want to take that?
Well, I think you answered that. Congestive heart failure means that the heart is unable to pump the required amount of blood that it needs.
Okay.
And usually, if it's not able to pump it out, then it floods the system. The blood must go round and circulate,
Okay.
But and Dr. Safo mentioned that swollen feet could be a sign of heart failure, and that's congestive heart failure, because the heart is unable to pump the blood around for the body's utilization. So it floods the system, and yes, it can be. But I'm cautious to say that anybody with a swollen feet has a diagnosis like this. There are many reasons why your feet could be swollen.
Okay.
It could be liver, it could be kidney, it could be heart. It could even be because you sit for too long. If you sit down for 10 hours every day, your feet are bound to get swollen. It could mean that the valves in your vessels are not working well, because in addition to your heart pumping, there are valves in the arteries in your vein, in your legs, that must also pump the blood up. So there are many reasons.
Okay.
But whatever it is, seek medical advice and let's make a diagnosis.
There's a very handy book called Let's Talk Diabetes. It's a reference guide for patients and their caregivers, and I think it's one of those books that you need in your home right now, and Dr. Yakoba Atiase authored it. Doc, how can we get this book?
This book is on Booknook, www.booknook.com. It's also in various bookshops. It's in the Kolebo Kingdom Books. It's in the Kolebo Pharmacy. It's in Vidya. It's in various hospitals. In Tema, it's in Nabita. It's in Port Clinic. There's a phone number you can call, 055-999-1110, I think. If you want a copy, just make a call, and you will be, it will be made available to you.
Okay.
Soft copies are not yet available, but soon.
We do have copies at Medicas Hospital.
Medicas,
well.
how did I forget that?
Oh, great.
Various
That's
hospitals,
great.
yeah. In Mampong, yes, and
Yeah.
even in Adenta, right?
In
Adenta.
Medina, Firestone branch as well.
Yeah.
Dr. Yakoba Atias is a consultant endocrinologist and diabetologist at the Kolebo Teaching Hospital She's a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana Medical School and the head of the National Diabetes Management and Research Center. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yamin Shaw,
Lexis.
right.
Thank you.
Mr. Wise Chukudi Lecha, our dietitian, he's written a lot of books actually. I've got 3 of them here. One is Live Long by Eating Well. Diet articles that will change your life. There's Eating to Prevent and Manage Lifestyle Diseases and Be Your Own Dietitian. 150 commonly asked diet questions answered. Wise, where are we going to get this book?
Yeah.
Or these books?
So first of all, you can call 059 566 7197. 059 566 7197. Somebody will deliver the books to you.
Oh, great.
You discuss means of delivery. And then they're also available at Kingdom Books. Almost all Kingdom Books in the country, you'll find my books there.
Okay.
Legon Bookshop, at Osu, on UCC campus, KNUST campus, all over. You find them over there. And like I said, also you can download them from Google Play.
Okay.
Onto your Android devices for now.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Yao Osafo is CEO of Medicas Hospital. He's not written a book yet. He writes his book every Wednesday on drive time. So on Wednesday at 4:30, he will be on drive time with me as we explore so many other health conditions and do more education on health to make sure you are better. But he's the CEO of Medicas Hospital. It's in Mampong, Equiapim, and Medina Firestone. So if you have any condition you'd want him and his team to help you with, you can pass by or you can just get onto our social media platforms. Doc, what's the number to reach out to you on in the social
platform?
platform?
0501 477 340, and our social media handles are Medicas Hospital, that's our Facebook wall, and then at Medicas GH, our Twitter handle, and then at Medicas GH
On Instagram
as well. And there's lots of information every Wednesday. All that information is put out there, and you can educate yourself on a variety of health issues.
Thank you so much. If you need the Let's Talk Diabetes book by Dr. Jacob Atiase, you can call 055 1119 990. That's 055 111 9990. There you go. I'm Lexis Bill. Thanks a lot for spending time with us on our health and wellness series, the 3rd edition. We're grateful that you stayed up and made time to spend time with us here on the show. We'll actually update you on the next edition and what we'll be talking about. We're back on Drive Time tomorrow.